I was staring at a certified letter from my HOA board when I realized that $35,000 of freshly poured concrete might become the most expensive mistake of my life. The letter, signed by Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA in Scottsdale, Arizona, stated in cold legal language that my architectural approval had been revoked, and I had 7 days to remove the foundation I had just poured for my garage addition. My name is Daniel Quincy, and I had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 3 years without a single issue. I worked as a civil engineer for a construction firm downtown, which made this situation even more infuriating. I knew how to follow procedures. I had submitted my architectural plans 4 months ago, waited patiently through their review process, and received written approval dated February 14th, 2026. I had that approval framed in my mind because it came on Valentine's Day, and my wife had joked that the HOA had finally shown me some love. The concrete had been poured exactly 1 week ago. The foundation was perfect, professionally done by Martinez Brothers Construction, a company I had worked with on commercial projects. The dimensions matched my approved plans down to the inch. I had even paid extra for decorative aggregate that matched the existing driveway, something the architectural guidelines suggested, but did not require. Now, 3 days after the concrete had cured, Patricia Henderson was telling me it all had to go. I read the letter again, searching for any explanation that made sense. The stated reason was failure to comply with updated architectural guidelines adopted March 1st, 2026. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA portal. Sure enough, there was a new document posted, dated March 1st, that included a provision limiting garage additions to single-story structures with a maximum height of 12 feet from grade to roof peak. My approved plans showed a 2-story addition with my garage on the ground floor and a home office above. The total height was 18 feet, well within the original guidelines that allowed structures up to 25 feet. But according to this new rule, I was over by 6 feet. The problem was obvious. I had received approval on February 14th. Construction began on March 15th. The new guidelines were adopted 2 weeks before I broke ground, but nobody had notified me. Nobody had revoked my approval. Nobody had said a word until the foundation was already poured, and the framing lumber was sitting in my driveway under tarps. I called the HOA management office immediately. A bored-sounding receptionist named Amber told me that Patricia Henderson was unavailable, but would return my call within 48 hours. I explained that the letter gave me 7 days to remove the foundation, which meant I needed to speak with someone immediately. Amber repeated that Patricia would call me back and hung up. My wife, Linda, came home from her nursing shift at Scottsdale Healthcare around 6 that evening. She found me at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, my laptop open to Arizona HOA statutes, and my phone showing a call log with 15 attempted calls to Patricia Henderson's personal number, which I had gotten from a neighborhood directory. What happened? Linda asked, immediately sensing the tension. I handed her the letter. She read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. Linda was normally the calm one in our relationship, the person who talked me down from overreacting to minor frustrations. But this was not minor. "They cannot do this," she said flatly. "You have approval, written approval." "Apparently they can if the guidelines changed before construction started," I said, pointing to the relevant section of Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33 on my laptop screen. But the law also says they have to provide reasonable notice of guideline changes and that existing approvals should be grandfathered unless there is a safety issue. Is there a safety issue? None. The plans were drawn by a licensed architect. They were reviewed by the HOA's architectural committee. Everything is structurally sound and meets all county building codes. This is purely about them changing the rules and not bothering to tell me. Linda sat down across from me. So what do we do? I need to talk to Patricia Henderson. If that does not work, I am hiring a lawyer. Patricia did not call back in 48 hours. She did not call back in 72 hours. On the 5th day after receiving the letter, with only 2 days remaining before the HOA's deadline, I drove to her house at 7 in the morning. Patricia lived in one of the larger homes in Meadowbrook Hills, a sprawling ranch-style property with immaculate landscaping and a 3-car garage. Her white Mercedes SUV was parked in the driveway. I rang the doorbell and waited. The woman who answered was exactly what I expected. Patricia Henderson was in her early 50s, with blonde hair styled in that specific way that required weekly salon visits, wearing expensive athleisure clothing despite clearly having no intention of exercising. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had found dog waste on her doorstep. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear that helping me was the last thing she wanted to do. "I am Daniel Quincy from 4782 Saguaro Drive. I have been trying to reach you about the letter I received regarding my garage addition. I am aware of your situation, Mr. Quincy. The letter outlined everything you need to know. The letter did not explain why my approval was revoked after construction had already begun. I received written approval on February 14th. The guidelines changed on March 1st. I was never notified. Construction started on March 15th, and the foundation was poured on May 12th. Nobody said anything until now." Patricia crossed her arms. The new guidelines were posted on the HOA portal. Residents are responsible for staying informed about rule changes. I had already received approval. There was no reason for me to check for new guidelines. That is not the HOA's problem, Mr. Quincy. The guidelines changed before you began construction. Your project does not comply with current standards. You need to remove the foundation and submit new plans, or the HOA will take legal action. Legal action? I felt my jaw tighten. You approved my plans. I spent $35,000 on site preparation, materials, and the foundation pour. You are telling me to eat that cost because you did not bother to notify me that my approval was invalidated. Watch your tone, Mr. Quincy. I am a volunteer trying to maintain property values for everyone in this community. Your oversized garage addition would set a precedent that could lead to all sorts of inappropriate construction. The architectural guidelines exist for a reason. My addition is not oversized. It complies with the guidelines that were in effect when I received approval. It complies with county building codes. It complies with setback requirements. The only thing it does not comply with is a rule that was changed after I had already been approved. Patricia's expression hardened. You have 2 days to begin removal, Mr. Quincy. If you fail to comply, the HOA will file for an injunction and place a lien on your property for the cost of forced compliance. Have a good day. She closed the door in my face. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes, forcing myself to calm down before driving. I had dealt with difficult people throughout my career, but Patricia Henderson was operating on a different level. She was not interested in finding a solution. She wanted to flex her authority, and I was the convenient target. Back at home, I called Robert Chen, an attorney I knew from a previous commercial construction dispute. Robert practiced real estate law and had mentioned once that he handled HOA cases. His secretary scheduled an emergency consultation for that afternoon. Robert's office was in downtown Scottsdale, in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Camelback Mountain. He was in his late 30s, sharp-dressed and sharp-minded, the kind of lawyer who got results. I laid out the entire situation, providing him with copies of my original architectural application, the written approval dated February 14th, the new guidelines posted March 1st, and Patricia Henderson's revocation letter. Robert reviewed everything carefully, making notes on a legal pad. "This is egregious," he said after 20 minutes. "Arizona law is very clear on this. HOAs have broad authority, but they cannot arbitrarily revoke approvals after a homeowner has relied on that approval and incurred significant expense. The legal term is equitable estoppel. Can you explain that in plain English? Essentially, the HOA gave you permission to build. You relied on that permission and spent substantial money. They cannot now take away that permission without compensating you for your losses. Additionally, Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1806 requires HOAs to act in good faith and deal fairly with homeowners. Revoking an approval without notice after construction has begun is not fair dealing. So what are my options? You have several. First, I will send a demand letter to the HOA explaining why their revocation is legally invalid and demanding they reinstate your approval. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit for declaratory relief and damages. Based on what you have shown me, you have an excellent case. How long will that take? The lawsuit itself could take 6 months to a year. However, we can also file for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction to prevent the HOA from taking any action against you while the case is pending. That hearing would happen within a few weeks. I thought about the timeline. And if we win, you get to complete your garage addition as approved, plus we sue for your attorney fees, your costs, and potentially additional damages for bad faith. Arizona law allows homeowners to recover attorney fees in HOA disputes if the HOA acted unreasonably. Let us do it. All of it. Robert smiled. I will have the demand letter sent tomorrow morning by certified mail and email. In the meantime, do not remove anything. Do not alter your foundation. Document everything. If Patricia Henderson or anyone from the HOA contacts you, be polite but do not agree to anything. Refer them to me. I left Robert's office feeling better than I had in days. I was not alone anymore and I had a plan. The demand letter went out the next morning, May 22nd. Robert sent me a copy. It was 5 pages of dense legal argument, citations to Arizona statutes and case law, and a clear demand that the HOA immediately reinstate my architectural approval and cease all threats of legal action. The letter concluded by stating that if the HOA did not respond within 5 business days, we would file suit in Maricopa County Superior Court. Patricia Henderson responded in less than 24 hours, but not to Robert. Instead, she sent a mass email to the entire Meadowbrook Hills community. The subject line was urgent. Homeowner refuses to comply with architectural guidelines. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation. Patricia wrote that a homeowner, unnamed but easily identifiable given the circumstances, was attempting to build an oversized, out-of-character structure that violated community standards. She claimed the HOA had tried to work with this homeowner, but he had refused to cooperate and hired an aggressive attorney to bully the volunteer board. She urged all residents to support the board in protecting our property values and warned that if this homeowner was allowed to proceed, it would open the floodgates to inappropriate construction throughout the neighborhood. My phone started ringing within an hour. Most of my neighbors were supportive, having seen my plans and knowing I had followed all the proper procedures. But a few had been swayed by Patricia's email. Mrs. Kowalski from 3 houses down called to ask if I was really building something that would hurt property values. Mr. Drake from across the street mentioned that he hoped I would do the right thing and work with the HOA. Linda was furious. She is lying. She is straight up lying to turn the neighborhood against you. I know, but we have the truth on our side. Robert said to document everything, so I am forwarding this email to him right now. Robert called me 30 minutes later. This email is gold for our case. It shows bad faith. It shows the HOA is trying to create public pressure to force you to comply, and it arguably constitutes defamation. I am adding a claim for that as well. You sound happy about this. I am. Patricia Henderson just made a significant mistake. She is emotionally invested in winning, which means she is going to keep making mistakes. We are going to use every one of them. The 5-business-day deadline passed with no response from the HOA to Robert's demand letter. On June 1, 2026, Robert filed a lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint named the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, Patricia Henderson individually, and the 3 other members of the HOA board as defendants. We sued for declaratory relief, injunctive relief, breach of contract, breach of the covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and defamation. The filing fee was substantial, but Robert assured me we would recover it when we won. Along with the complaint, Robert filed a motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction. The hearing was scheduled for June 15th. Patricia's response was predictable. Another mass email went out, this time claiming I was wasting HOA funds by forcing the association to defend itself against frivolous litigation. She conveniently omitted the fact that she had created this situation by revoking my approval without cause. The HOA hired its own attorney, a man named Gregory Stone from a firm that specialized in representing homeowners associations. Robert knew him by reputation. Stone is competent but unimaginative, Robert told me during a prep session for the hearing. He will argue that HOAs have discretion, that guidelines can change, and that you should have checked before building. He will not have a good answer for why they revoked an existing approval without notice. What do I need to do at the hearing? Tell the truth. The judge will want to understand the timeline and see evidence that you relied on the approval in good faith. Bring receipts for everything you spent on the project. Bring photographs of the foundation. Be calm and factual. Let Patricia be the emotional one. The hearing took place in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and air conditioning. Judge Michelle Torres presided, a woman in her late 40s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Robert had briefed me on her background. She had ruled against HOAs in several high-profile cases and was known for enforcing the statutory requirement that HOAs act reasonably. We sat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Gregory Stone sat with Patricia Henderson and 2 other board members, Kenneth Morris and Susan Drake. Kenneth was a retired accountant who generally let Patricia make all the decisions. Susan was Mr. Drake's wife from across the street, a quiet woman who seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. Judge Torres called the hearing to order and asked Robert to present our case. Robert stood and delivered a clear, concise summary. He explained that I had submitted plans, received written approval, waited for the appropriate time, and begun construction in compliance with all applicable rules and regulations. He explained that the guidelines had changed after approval, but before construction, and that I was never notified. He explained that I had spent over $35,000 in reliance on the approval, and that the HOA was now trying to force me to absorb that loss, despite having done nothing wrong. Your Honor, this is exactly the type of arbitrary and capricious action that Arizona law prohibits, Robert concluded. Mr. Quincy followed every rule. He obtained approval. He hired licensed professionals. He pulled the proper permits with Maricopa County. The only thing he did not do was predict that the HOA would change the guidelines without notice and then revoke his approval after he had already begun construction. That is not a reasonable expectation, and it is not fair dealing. Judge Torres turned to Gregory Stone. Counsel, what is the HOA's position? Stone stood. He was in his 50s with gray hair and a pinched expression that suggested he found this whole matter beneath him. Your Honor, the HOA has a duty to enforce its architectural guidelines. Those guidelines changed on March 1, 2026. Mr. Quincy began construction on March 15th, which was after the new guidelines took effect. His project does not comply with the current guidelines. Therefore, the HOA was within its rights to revoke approval. Was Mr. Quincy notified that the guidelines had changed? The guidelines were posted on the HOA portal, Your Honor. Homeowners are responsible for staying informed. Was his existing approval revoked before construction began? Stone hesitated. The approval was revoked on May 19th, Your Honor. After construction began and after the foundation was poured. Yes, Your Honor, but the project did not comply with the guidelines in effect at the time construction began. Judge Torres flipped through the documents in front of her. Mr. Stone, I am looking at the approval letter dated February 14, 2026. It is signed by Mrs. Henderson and states that the project complies with all architectural guidelines and is approved for construction. There is no expiration date. There is no condition that the approval could be revoked if guidelines changed. How is Mr. Quincy supposed to know that an unconditional written approval could be taken away without notice? Your Honor, HOA guidelines are subject to change. Homeowners accept that when they purchase property in a covenant-controlled community. That is not an answer to my question, counsel. I am asking how a reasonable homeowner, who received written approval with no conditions or expiration date, would know to check for guideline changes before beginning construction under that approval. Stone did not have a good answer. He tried to pivot to the HOA's discretion and the importance of architectural control, but Judge Torres cut him off. I have heard enough. Mrs. Henderson, I would like to hear from you directly. Why did you wait until after Mr. Quincy poured his foundation to revoke his approval? Patricia stood up, ignoring Stone's attempt to stop her. Your Honor, I did not realize Mr. Quincy had begun construction until a neighbor informed me that there was concrete work happening at his property. When I reviewed the plans, I realized they did not comply with our new guidelines. I acted as soon as I became aware of the situation. You are the HOA president. You signed his approval letter. You did not think to check whether any approved projects were affected when you adopted new guidelines. We have many responsibilities, Your Honor. We cannot personally monitor every property. You also sent an email to all residents on May 21st regarding Mr. Quincy's project. That email described him as refusing to cooperate and hiring an aggressive attorney. Do you believe that was an accurate characterization? Patricia's face reddened. I was trying to keep the community informed. You were trying to turn the community against Mr. Quincy to pressure him into removing his foundation. That is what your email accomplished, whether you want to admit it or not. Judge Torres turned back to the attorneys. Here is what I see. Mr. Quincy did everything right. He submitted plans. He got approval. He hired professionals. He pulled permits. He began construction at a reasonable time after approval. The HOA changed the guidelines and did not notify him. The HOA did not revoke his approval until after he had incurred substantial expense. The HOA then attempted to use community pressure to force compliance. This is not fair dealing. This is not reasonable. This is exactly the kind of HOA overreach that gives homeowners associations a bad reputation. Stone tried to interject, but Judge Torres held up her hand. I am granting the motion for preliminary injunction. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA is enjoined from taking any action to prevent Mr. Quincy from completing his garage addition, as approved on February 14, 2026. The HOA shall not file liens, shall not assess fines, shall not send demand letters, and shall not take any other action to interfere with construction. This injunction remains in effect pending resolution of the underlying lawsuit. We will schedule a status conference in 30 days. Is there anything else? Robert stood. No, Your Honor, thank you. Stone gathered his papers. Nothing further, Your Honor. We left the courtroom with a huge win. Patricia Henderson did not look at me as she walked out with her attorney and the other board members. Outside, Robert shook my hand. That went as well as it possibly could have. Judge Torres eviscerated their position. Now Stone is going to tell Patricia that they need to settle before this gets worse. You think she will settle? She should. But my guess is she is too proud. She is going to want to fight this all the way, which means more attorney fees, more bad decisions, and ultimately a bigger judgment against the HOA. Robert was right. Over the next 3 weeks, the HOA did not reach out to settle. Instead, Patricia doubled down. She sent another email to residents claiming that the judge had been misled by clever lawyering, and that the board was appealing the unjust ruling. There was no appeal. Judge Torres had issued a preliminary injunction, which is not immediately appealable in Arizona. Patricia was either lying or did not understand the legal process. Given her track record, both were possible. Construction resumed on my garage addition. Martinez Brothers Construction returned with their crew, and we began framing. The work proceeded smoothly. Several neighbors stopped by to express support and to see the progress. Even Mr. and Mrs. Drake came over to apologize for believing Patricia's emails. We should have known better, Mrs. Drake said. Patricia has always been difficult, but this is beyond the pale. Her husband nodded. A bunch of us are going to petition for a special election to remove her from the board. What she did to you is not right. That conversation gave me hope. Maybe something good would come out of this nightmare after all. The status conference happened on July 15th. Judge Torres asked both sides if there had been any settlement discussions. Robert stated that we had not received any offers. Stone stated that the HOA was evaluating its options, but had not yet made a decision. Judge Torres was not impressed. Mr. Stone, you need to explain to your client that she is not going to win this case. Mr. Quincy has complied with the preliminary injunction terms. Construction is proceeding, and the HOA has no legal basis for the revocation. If this goes to trial, the HOA is going to lose, and it is going to pay Mr. Quincy's attorney fees in addition to its own. That could easily exceed $100,000. Settling now would be prudent. Stone nodded. I will convey that to my client, Your Honor. 2 days later, Robert received a settlement offer. The HOA would allow construction to continue and would pay $20,000 toward my attorney fees. In exchange, I would release all claims and agree not to sue for additional damages. Robert and I discussed the offer. It is not bad, he said. $20,000 would cover most of your fees to date. You get to finish your project, which was your main goal. The downside is you would not recover the full value of your claims, and you would not hold Patricia accountable for the defamation. What do you think the case is worth if we go to trial, conservatively? 60 to 80,000 in attorney fees, 35,000 for the foundation costs you incurred as a result of their breach, and potentially punitive damages given Patricia's conduct. Total recovery could be in the range of 150,000 to 200,000. But that would take how long? Trial is probably 6 months away. Then there could be post-trial motions, and if they appeal, add another year. I thought about it. I had already spent months dealing with this situation. Linda and I had argued about whether it was worth the stress. My work had suffered because I was distracted by the lawsuit. Part of me wanted to take the 20,000 and move on. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 years following every HOA rule without complaint, the part that had done everything right and still gotten screwed, wanted Patricia Henderson to face consequences. Let us counter, I said. 80,000 in attorney fees, reimbursement of the 35,000 I spent on the foundation and site prep, and Patricia Henderson has to resign from the board. If they accept that, I will settle. Robert grinned. I like it. Let me draft the counter. The counter offer went out the next day. Stone called Robert within an hour. The conversation was short. The HOA was willing to pay 50,000 total, period, and Patricia Henderson would not resign. We rejected the offer. They are going to trial, Robert said after he hung up. Patricia is controlling the board, and she would rather spend $100,000 of HOA money than admit she was wrong. Then we go to trial. As construction on my garage continued, life in Meadowbrook Hills became increasingly tense. A group of homeowners, led by Mr. Drake, had gathered enough signatures to force a special election for the HOA board. Under Arizona law, a recall election could be triggered if 20% of homeowners signed a petition. The petition had been submitted in mid-July, and the election was scheduled for August 20th. Patricia fought back. She sent emails accusing the petition organizers of trying to destabilize the community. She claimed that removing the board would create chaos and invite lawsuits. The irony of that last point was not lost on anyone. The recall election was held on a Saturday morning at the community clubhouse. Linda and I arrived early to vote. The turnout was impressive, with nearly 70% of homeowners participating. When the votes were counted, Patricia Henderson, Kenneth Morris, and Susan Drake had all been removed from the board by overwhelming margins. The newly elected board members were younger, more reasonable people who actually listened to homeowners. The new president was James Martinez, a software engineer in his 40s who had been vocal about Patricia's mismanagement. His first act was to reach out to Robert to discuss settling the lawsuit. "We have reviewed the case thoroughly," James said during a conference call with Robert and me. "The previous board made serious errors in judgment. We want to make this right. What would it take to resolve this?" Robert laid out our previous counter-offer. 80,000 in attorney fees, 35,000 in reimbursement for foundation and site prep costs, and removal of Patricia Henderson from the board. "Patricia is already off the board," James said. "The attorney fees and reimbursement are reasonable. We can agree to that. I do need to run it past the full board, but I expect approval. Can we have a week to finalize everything?" "Absolutely," Robert said. A week later, we had a signed settlement agreement. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA agreed to pay me a total of $115,000, covering all my attorney fees, all my out-of-pocket construction costs, and an additional amount for my time and aggravation. The settlement also included a clause stating that my architectural approval was fully reinstated, and could not be revoked for any reason absent a genuine safety issue identified by a licensed engineer. The check arrived on September 1st, 2026. I deposited it the same day. By mid-September, the garage addition was complete. It looked fantastic. The two-story structure blended perfectly with my existing home. The garage on the ground floor had space for 2 cars plus a workshop area. The office upstairs had large windows with views of the McDowell Mountains and enough space for a desk, filing cabinets, and a small meeting area. Several neighbors came over for a tour. Everyone agreed it was exactly what I had promised, a tasteful addition that enhanced rather than detracted from the neighborhood. Even people who had been skeptical initially admitted that Patricia had been wrong. But the story did not end there. In late September, I received a call from Robert. "You are not going to believe this," he said. "I just got a call from Gregory Stone. Apparently, the new HOA board has been reviewing financial records from Patricia's tenure as president, and they found some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve missing money." The board hired a forensic accountant, and it looks like Patricia embezzled somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 over the past 2 years. She was writing checks to fake vendors and pocketing the money. I was stunned. Are they going to prosecute? They already reported it to the Scottsdale Police Department. There is an active investigation. The next few weeks were surreal. The investigation into Patricia Henderson moved quickly. The forensic accountant found evidence of multiple fraudulent transactions. Patricia had created fake invoices for landscaping, repairs, and administrative services. She had then written checks to shell companies she controlled and deposited them in her personal accounts. The total amount embezzled was eventually calculated at $47,000. On October 15, 2026, Scottsdale police arrested Patricia Henderson at her home. She was charged with theft, fraudulent schemes and artifices, and forgery. The arrest made the local news, with footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs. The community was shocked. Some people had suspected Patricia was corrupt, but the extent of her theft was beyond what anyone had imagined. The new HOA board released a statement condemning her actions and promising to implement stronger financial controls. Patricia's attorney negotiated a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraudulent schemes, the other charges were dropped. She was sentenced in December to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of early release after 18 months for good behavior. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. I followed the case through news reports and updates from James Martinez, who kept me informed as a courtesy. Patricia never apologized for what she had done to me. She never acknowledged that her attempt to revoke my approval was wrong. Even during her sentencing hearing, she maintained that she had been trying to protect the community. The judge did not buy it. During sentencing, he noted that Patricia had abused her position of trust, stolen from her neighbors, and attempted to bully a homeowner who had done nothing wrong. The sentence was appropriate given the circumstances. My garage addition became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Hills. New homeowners would ask about it, and neighbors would tell the story of how I stood up to a corrupt HOA president and won. Some people even started calling it the Justice Garage, which always made me laugh. The office upstairs became my favorite place to work. I started spending mornings there before heading downtown, enjoying the natural light and the quiet. Linda would bring me coffee and sit with me while I reviewed blueprints or answered emails. It was the space I had envisioned when I first submitted the plans, and it was worth every ounce of stress it had caused. The settlement money more than covered my expenses. After paying Robert his fees and reimbursing myself for the foundation costs, I had a significant amount left over. Linda and I decided to use it for a long-delayed vacation. We spent 2 weeks in Hawaii, disconnecting from everything and just enjoying each other's company. When we returned, life in Meadowbrook Hills had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was competent and fair. They streamlined the architectural approval process, implemented transparent financial reporting, and actually listened to homeowner concerns. It was everything an HOA should be but rarely is. I ran into Kenneth Morris at the grocery store one day in January 2027. He had been one of the board members who stood by while Patricia tried to destroy me. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but I stopped to talk. "Daniel, I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I should have stood up to Patricia. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I was afraid of her. She had a way of making everyone feel small." "I appreciate that, Kenneth. It took guts to say it. For what it is worth, I am glad you fought back. If you had not, she would still be stealing from all of us. You did the whole community a favor." We shook hands and he walked away. I realized that I was not angry anymore. The whole experience had been terrible, but it had also shown me that standing up for what is right matters. It had shown me that bullies like Patricia only win if people let them. My story spread beyond Meadowbrook Hills. Robert mentioned it at a legal conference on HOA law, and soon I was getting calls from journalists who wanted to cover it. I gave a few interviews, always emphasizing the same points. Follow the rules, document everything, and do not be afraid to fight back when an HOA acts illegally. One interview was picked up by a national news outlet, and suddenly, I was getting emails and messages from people across the country who had their own HOA horror stories. Some of them were worse than mine. People who had been fined for trivial violations. People who had been foreclosed on for missing a single payment. People who had been bullied into compliance by petty dictators like Patricia Henderson. I tried to help where I could. I connected people with attorneys who specialized in HOA law. I shared resources about homeowner rights under various state laws. I offered moral support to people who felt alone in their fights. The experience changed how I thought about community governance. HOAs serve an important function when they are run properly. They maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and provide a framework for resolving disputes. But they also attract people who crave power and control, people like Patricia who use their positions to settle scores and enrich themselves. The solution, I realized, was engagement. Most HOA problems exist because homeowners do not pay attention until it is too late. They do not read the meeting minutes. They do not vote in elections. They do not run for the board. By the time they realize something is wrong, the damage has been done. I decided to stay involved. I started attending HOA meetings regularly, not to cause trouble, but to keep an eye on things. I volunteered for the architectural committee, using my engineering background to help review plans fairly and thoroughly. I made sure that other homeowners knew their rights and felt empowered to speak up. The Meadowbrook Hills community flourished under the new leadership. Property values increased. More families moved in. The clubhouse and common areas were improved with funds that Patricia would have stolen. It became the kind of neighborhood we had hoped for when we moved in. My relationship with my neighbors deepened. The people who had supported me during the lawsuit became close friends. We had barbecues, went to each other's kids' sporting events, and looked out for one another. It was the kind of community that Patricia had always claimed to be protecting, but had actually been destroying. Linda and I talked about the whole experience one evening in February 2027, almost a year after the initial approval letter. We were sitting in my new office, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. "You regret fighting back?" she asked. I thought about it. The lawsuit had been stressful. The uncertainty had been difficult. The money I spent on attorney fees before the settlement had been substantial. But in the end, justice had prevailed. "No," I said. "If I had backed down, Patricia would have gotten away with it. She would have kept stealing, kept bullying, kept making life miserable for anyone who challenged her. By fighting back, I did not just help myself. I helped everyone." "You sound like a superhero," Linda teased, more like a stubborn engineer who refused to let a corrupt HOA president push him around. She laughed. "Well, your stubborn streak paid off. We have a beautiful office, a hefty settlement check, and Patricia is in prison. I would call that a win." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Through the window, I could see other houses in Meadowbrook Hills, lights coming on as families settled in for the evening. I thought about all the people who lived here, the neighbors I had gotten to know, the community we were building together. The whole experience had taught me valuable lessons. I had learned that standing up to bullies is worth the cost. I had learned that documentation and preparation matter more than passion or outrage. I had learned that a good attorney is worth their weight in gold. And I had learned that most people, given the chance, want to do the right thing. Patricia Henderson represented the worst of HOA governance, but James Martinez and the new board represented the best. The difference was not just competence or honesty, though those mattered. The difference was respect. The new board respected homeowners as partners in the community rather than subjects to be controlled. As winter turned to spring in 2027, I found myself genuinely happy. The garage addition was complete and fully functional. The lawsuit was resolved. Patricia was facing consequences for her crimes. The community was healing. Linda and I were stronger as a couple, having weathered the storm together. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had just given in to Patricia's demands. If I had removed the foundation, absorbed the loss, and submitted new plans. It would have been easier in the short term, no doubt. But it would have also taught Patricia that her tactics worked. It would have encouraged her to keep abusing her power. And it would have left me with the bitter knowledge that I had backed down when I was in the right. Instead, I had fought. And won. The financial settlement was satisfying, but the real victory was justice. Patricia had tried to use her position to hurt me, and instead, her actions had exposed her corruption and led to her downfall. There was something poetic about that. Robert called me in March with an update. "I thought you would want to know that Gregory Stone is no longer representing HOAs in Arizona. Apparently, his firm decided that the negative publicity from the Henderson case was too damaging. They are focusing on other areas of real estate law now." "Is that because of our case specifically?" "Partly. But also because once the criminal investigation became public, a lot of Stone's other HOA clients started asking questions. Turns out Patricia was not an isolated incident. Stone had a pattern of defending HOA boards that acted badly, and his firm decided it was not worth the reputational risk. So we changed more than just Meadowbrook Hills. You did. Your case is going to be cited in Arizona for years as an example of what HOAs cannot do. It has already been referenced in 2 other lawsuits that I know of. You made precedent, Daniel. That conversation stayed with me. I had never set out to be a crusader or a test case. I had just wanted to build a garage addition. But circumstances had forced me to become something more, and in the process, I had made a difference. The 1-year anniversary of the foundation pour came and went. I marked it quietly, remembering the panic I had felt when I received Patricia's revocation letter, the anger during those first conversations with her, and the determination that had carried me through the lawsuit. It felt like a lifetime ago. In May 2027, the Meadowbrook Hills HOA held its annual meeting. James Martinez gave a presentation on the state of the association. He highlighted improved finances, completed maintenance projects, and increased homeowner satisfaction. He also addressed the unfortunate events of the previous year, acknowledging that the community had been through a difficult time but had emerged stronger. During the open comment period, I stood up. I want to thank the current board for their integrity and fairness. What happened last year was difficult, but it showed that our community values justice and accountability. I am proud to live here, and I am optimistic about our future. The room erupted in applause. Several people stood. It was one of those moments that you remember forever, a validation that I had done the right thing and that the community appreciated it. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to shake my hand or share their own stories. One man told me that my case had inspired him to challenge an unfair fine from his own HOA in Temp. A woman said that she was planning to run for her HOA board because she wanted to be part of the solution. A couple thanked me for setting an example for their teenage son about standing up for what is right. I drove home that night feeling a sense of closure. The saga that had begun with a simple architectural application had concluded with me becoming an unexpected advocate for homeowner rights. It was not a role I had sought, but it was one I had embraced. The garage addition stood as a physical reminder of everything we had been through. Every time I pulled into it, every time I climbed the stairs to my office, I remembered the fight, but I also remembered the victory. I remembered that doing the right thing, even when it is hard, even when it is expensive, even when it is uncertain, is always worth it. Patricia Henderson, sitting in a prison cell somewhere in Arizona, was presumably reflecting on her own choices. I did not feel particularly good about her incarceration, but I did not feel bad about it either. She had stolen from her neighbors, abused her position, and attempted to destroy me for having the audacity to follow the rules. The consequences she faced were the result of her own actions. As for me, I went back to living my life. I worked on engineering projects downtown. I spent time with Linda. I enjoyed my office and garage. I attended HOA meetings and stayed involved in the community. I helped other homeowners who faced similar challenges. The story of how my HOA revoked my architectural approval after I poured the foundation, and how they paid for every penny, became a part of Meadowbrook Hills lore. New homeowners heard it during their orientation. Real estate agents mentioned it when showing properties in the neighborhood. It was a reminder that even in the face of injustice, standing up for yourself can lead to positive change. Years later, I would look back on this period as a defining moment in my life. Not because of the garage addition itself, which was nice but ultimately just a building. Not because of the money, which was substantial but finite, but because of what I learned about myself. I learned that I was stronger than I thought. I learned that I could face down a bully and win. I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can deliver justice when you have the facts on your side. I learned that communities are worth fighting for, and that good people will step up when leadership fails. Most importantly, I learned that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult, even when the outcome is uncertain, is the only way to live with integrity. The garage addition that Patricia Henderson tried to stop became a symbol of all of that. Every time I looked at it, I did not just see concrete and wood and drywall. I saw perseverance. I saw justice. I saw proof that standing up to corruption and abuse of power matters, and that, in the end, was worth more than any settlement check or completed construction project. It was worth everything.